All right, welcome back. And today we got the hero who stood up to the My Lai Massacre. And if you don't know what the My Lai Massacre is, it was one of the really bad tragedies that happened during the Vietnam War. And it's one of the flaws, I'd say, in American history. Like I know we're not a perfect country, but we're doing pretty damn well compared to most other countries. I mean, like despite all the nonsense you hear on the news and everything, I'd say we're doing pretty damn well. But this guy, Hugh Thompson, yeah, we're gonna get right into him.
Thompson, the hero of My Lai, perhaps the most disgraceful event ever in U.S. military history, was the My Lai Massacre, where hundreds of unarmed civilians were killed by American soldiers. There was at least one American, however, who followed his conscience, and together with his two crewmates, prevented even more killings in this horrific incident. Hugh Clowers Thompson Jr. was born on April 14, 1943 in Atlanta, Georgia. His childhood was uneventful, and he attended Troy State University, though he dropped out before graduating. He then joined the Navy in 1961, where he was a Seabee until he left in 1964. Throughout his life, Thompson was fascinated by flying, and in 1966 he joined the U.S. Army, becoming qualified as a helicopter pilot. In 1967 he was sent to Vietnam, where he flew an OH-23 Raven reconnaissance helicopter. He was promoted to warrant officer and assigned to the 123rd Aviation Battalion, attached to the 23rd Infantry Division, which was known as the Americal Division. In March 1968, he, along with his crew chief Glenn Andreatta and Lawrence Colburn, who both acted as door gunners, were part of B Company Aero Scouts, aka the Warlords. On March 16th, Thompson and his crew were flying in support of Task Force Barker near the village of My Lai, located along the south coast of Vietnam. By this point in the war, the U.S. had just fought off the Tet Offensive, and though militarily it was a failure for the NVA and Viet Cong, who suffered devastating losses, it was a massive blow to American morale. Civilians back home, as well as troops in the field, were increasingly frustrated with the lack of any real progress being made in the war, which seemed to drag on without an end in sight. And the burgeoning anti-war movement was growing with each passing day. For over a month before My Lai, 3 companies of the 11th Infantry Brigade were searching for the 48th Viet Cong Battalion on a seek and destroy mission. Because there were no front lines in the conflict, success was measured by body count, tallies of the number of enemy killed and wounded. Officers and soldiers were pressured to increase their body counts, forcing them to take more and more drastic measures. Operating around the village of My Lai, the Americans were floundering in their objective of rooting out the VC, being continually harassed by the enemy, and were taking ever-mounting casualties. In the weeks leading up to the massacre, the men would be subject to mines, which killed or disabled 32 men. A few days later, one of the companies was hit by a mortar attack, and just days before the massacre, 4 men were killed by a booby trap. After about a month of patrolling in the region, C Company, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry Regiment, had endured 42 casualties and had hardly even seen the enemy, let alone engage them. With frustrations at a boiling point, the Americans lashed out and began a systematic massacre of the villagers, whom they suspected of being Viet Cong sympathizers. Grenades were tossed into huts, unarmed civilians were butchered without hesitation, and anyone who fled was shot without mercy. The survivors were herded to a nearby drainage ditch, where they were shot, and anyone who still moved was bayoneted. Hugh Thompson and his crew were flying in support of the operation, and early that morning had spotted 2 Vietnamese men, whom he suspected were VC. Landing, he managed to capture them, and they were sent off for interrogation. On the ground, he noticed a group of civilians who were wounded and marked the spot with green smoke to signal that they needed help. After refueling back at base, he returned to the area and was horrified to find that the location he had marked earlier was now filled with corpses. At first, Thompson and his crew had thought that the dead had been caught in the open by an artillery barrage and killed accidentally. Moving on from that horrific sight, Thompson noticed another wounded Vietnamese woman, again marking the site for medevac. He became sickened to see American soldiers attracted by the smoke finish off the wounded civilian. It was at this moment when he realized what was happening. In a 2000 interview, Thompson stated, quote, "We started noticing these large numbers of bodies everywhere, people on the road dead, wounded, and just sitting there saying, God, how'd this happen? What's going on? And we started thinking what might have happened, but you didn't want to accept that. Because if you accepted it, that means your own fellow Americans, people you were there to protect, were doing something very evil." End quote. Thompson landed next to the ditch, where he had an altercation with Lieutenant William Calley, the main instigator of the massacre. Thompson took to the air again and was horrified by seeing Calley and his men finishing off the survivors in the ditch. At that moment, to the northeastern portion of the village, Thompson saw a group of about 10 Vietnamese civilians fleeing towards a homemade bomb shelter, with a platoon of Americans in pursuit. Knowing he had to do something to prevent more bloodshed, he acted quickly and decisively. Landing between the civilians and the Americans, he shouted for Andronetta and Colburn to cover him, and that if the Americans opened fire on him or the civilians, to return fire. Under the cover of his crew's M60 machine guns, he confronted Stephen Brooks, leader of 2nd Platoon. An argument began between the men, Thompson attempting to prevent more killings, with Brooks insistent that the Vietnamese be finished off with a grenade thrown into the bunker. Eventually, Brooks backed down, and Thompson was able to convince the Vietnamese to leave the bunker. Thompson would then signal to his 2 circling escort Huey helicopters to land and evacuate the civilians, taking them to a safe location. Once again returning from base to refuel, Andronetta saw movement in the drainage ditch. Thompson landed his OH-23, and he and his crew searched through the corpses until Andronetta found a young boy who had survived the massacre. Taking him on board, Thompson flew him to an ARV and hospital for treatment. Upon returning to base, Thompson immediately reported what he had seen to his superiors. News of the incident reached Lieutenant Colonel Frank Baker, the overall commander of the operation, and the order was given that led to the cessation of military activities in the area. Thompson was then interviewed by the commander of the 11th Infantry Brigade, who canceled further operations in the region, potentially preventing further killings. Initially, the Army tried to cover up the My Lai massacre, reporting that the operation in the region was a great success and that many Viet Cong guerrillas had been eliminated. Eventually, though, the truth of what happened was revealed, and a congressional inquiry into the events of My Lai began. Thompson testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee, which launched an investigation into the massacre. Initially, some of the committee members wanted to punish Thompson for turning his weapons on fellow Americans, but no charges were ever brought. 14 officers would be court-martialed for their participation in either the massacre or the following cover-up, but only one, Lieutenant William Calley, would be found guilty. Thompson testified at Calley's trial, for which he received death threats. Thompson would continue to fly for the Army, eventually becoming an instructor. He would leave in 1983 with the rank of major. It wasn't until 1998 when he would be officially recognized for his actions. Hugh Thompson, as well as Lawrence Colburn, would be awarded the Soldier's Medal, the highest award the military can bestow for heroism not involving conflict with an enemy, and is on a roughly comparable status to a Distinguished Flying Cross. Glenn Andreatta would also be awarded the Soldier's Medal posthumously, having been killed in action 3 weeks after the My Lai incident. The My Lai massacre is one of the most shameful events in U.S. military history, and it was a major contributing factor in the disillusionment with the conflict. This and other atrocities fed into the ever-growing anti-war movement, which were a contributing factor in the American withdrawal from the conflict. Thompson would pass away in 2006 at the age of 62 from cancer and would be buried with full military honors. Today, there's a small museum in My Lai where Thompson is honored for his role in stopping the killings. There's also a list of those killed on that horrible day. There is some dispute over the exact number, with American sources claiming that 347 were killed, and the Vietnamese placing the total at over 500. What is not in dispute is the fact that the actions of Hugh Thompson and his crew kept the number from being even higher.
That's all you can do. That's all you can do.
We were just...
Alright, yeah, and that wraps up the video, so damn, that's like way to make a light in a dark situation with that guy, Hugh Thompson, and the, of course I forget the other guys' names already, but all 3 of them, fuck yeah, like that's what we really need more of, like in America, or just people in general. Like we need people to be courageous even when like it's not the right thing to do. It's like even if it feels against your morals, or am I saying that right? Doesn't matter. Like it's really hard to when you're so blinded by patriotism instead of using your brain and like your critical thinking instead, which is especially when you're at such a young age and you think you're just there for a mission, like no matter what. But shout out to him, Hugh Thompson. I'm surprised they don't have like huge movies about him yet, because I know there is some documentaries, like more or less for the My Lai massacre or just that guy in general. Because I looked it up, like a little consensus of who he was. But either way, as like as shitty as that is as an American to see the awful things we've done to other civilians, like that's the only thing that's really crossed the line is the civilians. Like even to this day, like there's wars that we're funding, and I'm very skeptical about it, but we're not going to get into that. Either way, that's about it.